Hi all, Rob here from Way Out West. We have an incredible gig coming up Sunday the 8th of June. Our favourite Lloyd Spiegel will be in the house with his good buddy, the incredibly talented Charlie Accord. Charlie is a native of Nova Scotia, Canada. Charlie very graciously allowed me to interview him in his backyard. There are a couple of glitches in the recording, but it is well worth watching. It really is a fascinating chat. Please hit the like and subscribe button as it really helps me out. Hope to see you at the club for this incredible gig. And as always, rock on, my friends. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it, mate. It's been a while. I don't you remember if you remember me, you played at Way Out West probably 20 or something years ago, I think now.
Oh no, it wouldn't have been quite that long
Isn't
ago.
it?
I only started touring to Australia, and I think 2011 might have been my first trip over.
Okay.
But I was there. The time I was there, I think I was traveling with. I had Harry and Roscoe with me on that.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So
It feels like 20 years ago.
yeah.
Thanks to the pandemic, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, lots has happened.
Yeah.
So you can tell us a little bit about where you grew up, mate. Was music a big part of your family life?
Well, we growing up, I had a small-ish family in terms of my immediate family, where I grew up in the country, and where I did grow up was fairly regional. It was we were quite far outside of town, and the houses were sort of far apart from each other, and so music was the entertainment. It was the social network. It was the way we did connect with other neighbors when we did get together, and so music was sort of that conduit in building community and being connected with neighbors, even though we might have been far apart. Um, and so that was the way. You'd go about your business during the day. You'd get your chores done. You'd get your responsibilities done through the day. Myself growing up, that meant helping out around the property, going to school and coming back and doing my homework. And then the way you would unwind would be to grab an instrument and listen to your favorite songs and try to pick up on different things here and there. And that was how I spent a lot of my youth.
And was that in Nova Scotia? Did you grow up in Nova Scotia or
Yeah, yeah. I still live in Nova Scotia. We're no Nova Scotians are called Blue Nosers
Blue
in,
Noses?
yeah, because of the famous schooner, the Blue Nose.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yes, yes.
and so where I grew up was just north of the central town of Truro,
Mm,
and Truro is pretty much smack dab in the middle of the province,
mm,
and all the highways kind of pass in and out of it, and so just north of there by about 20 minutes there, is rural, very rural countryside,
mm,
and that's where I grew up and sort of cut my teeth,
mm.
so to speak, before moving down to the capital city, Halifax.
It looks quite rural where you are. It's a beautiful backdrop there.
I have to say I'm very lucky where my wife and son and I, where we live in the city. Um, the thing about Halifax is actually it's the times I've come to Oz, and I would go to Taz, for instance,
Mm,
and hang out in Hobart. I discovered that Hobart's actually as far south of the equator as Halifax is north,
mm,
and so the climate is very, very similar. The vegetation is very, very similar. Even a lot of the architectural design of of it being a port city, there was a lot of similarities there. So I feel very fortunate where we are in the city. There's still like some green belts
mm,
through the city where you can have a bit of protection from the typical city sounds and
mm,
the bustle of it all. So yeah, we've got a lovely little green belt that we our house backs onto, and it makes for a nice place for the young fellow to go and play with the neighborhood kids.
I thought there might have still been a bit of snow on the ground out your way.
Well, actually, we've pretty much just finished our essentially our first unofficial weekend of the summer, and I got myself a nice little
Yeah,
to commemorate it. I got myself a nice little burn to go with it,
yeah,
just in time to then come to Oz for 3 weeks of winter.
yeah. Well, it's been unseasonably warm here too. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, or for this time of the year, I should say. Now, when did you pick up the guitar and start singing, and who were some of your early influences?
Well, early on, it was certainly my dad. My father plays guitar, and there was always a couple of guitars in the house growing up, and so that was my earliest exposure. Was listening to dad play on a regular basis, and then once I took a sort of had an aptitude towards it, I had tried piano lessons for a couple of years when I was like 10, and I wasn't really that good at it. I wasn't getting any better at it after 2 years. And so the piano teacher actually suggested you should go try a different instrument. And so one day I saw my dad's guitar sitting in the corner of the living room, and I thought, well, it seemed like such second nature to reach for it. But I didn't at the time. I didn't know any chords or anything like that. So for me, it was just more of this joyful noise that I was strumming on the guitar, and I would have been about 12 when I first started to really kind of invest the time into understanding the chords that I was playing, and how to keep the instrument in tune and that sort of thing. And then I was really lucky that in my middle school years, um, that the music teacher that I had for grade 7, 8, and 9 offered classical guitar lessons, extracurricular, and so me and a small group of kids, we studied classical guitar for about 2 or 3 years before I moved into high school and joined the band program there.
Fantastic. And how is the music scene in Canada? Is it vibrant like here in Melbourne, Australia,
Well,
well, though
that's a
Canada's such a big space, so
it is a big space, and so
yeah.
because of that nature, there are distinct pockets of music scenes across the country that have their own. Some cities have genres that stand out a little more prevalent than others. Um, I think of Western Canada has a lot of, is probably known more for kind of roots Canadiana, country. Montreal, I would say the hip hop scene in Montreal, and the indie pop scene there is really really vibrant. Nova Scotia, because of its ties to Scottish, Celtic, and but also in indigenous music, there's been a lot of ties and like a lot of parallels through the styles, and so a lot of it here with fiddle music and Celtic singing, and um, that has a lot of storytelling elements to it. And then the Appalachia mountain range that comes up through the east side of North America tops out here in the region, and so there's also that elements that bring in the bluegrass and bring in Americana influences, and so blues here in Atlantic Canada has always been um, what would be the right way to place it? It's always been a well respected genre here in terms of um, you know players uh, who see it in a purist sense. And even though geographically we might be Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada by large might be sort of geographically removed from sort of the meccas or the staples of blues, it's like Australia. I think one of the reasons why I think the blues scene and sort of the fringe genres around blues in Australia is so strong is because it's had to be left on its own if it was to be a thriving artistic expression and a dialogue of a sense, a dialect. A lot of things that I see as Australian success stories in the music scene have been by virtue of needing to stand on its own,
Mm,
and so that's sort of how I feel about the blues community here in Atlantic Canada. Is that by virtue of being so far from what maybe others would consider the source of it,
mm,
and it's African American influence coming up from Louisiana and Alabama and Memphis and the scene in Chicago to make its way north.
mm,
Uh, has had it can be traced back to things as far back as the Underground Railroad, and how
mm,
the influence of the music that would travel
mm,
through those circuits
mm,
would make its way north of the border,
mm,
and for it to permeate here on the East Coast in a way that has sort of developed its own sound and its own homage to the blues,
mm,
makes it one of the sort of the hotbeds across Canada, I would think.
mm. Interesting you said the Underground Railroad there. I've read a fantastic book about that, and if people aren't aware of what that's all about, I might leave a link for it because it's really worth exploring the everything that happened with the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, there are some stories that would raise the hair on the back of your neck,
Mm,
um, uh, but there would be some inspirational moments of reading through some of that history that would show you, by example, how in the realm of artistic expression, how a lot of that has had interwoven into communities here in Atlantic Canada,
mm,
and also, for example, the expulsion of the Acadians
mm,
from Nova Scotia and parts of New Brunswick, but mainly through Nova Scotia, how that then was sort of came back by way of artistic influence through Cajun music
mm,
through Louisiana and across parts of Texas and that sort of thing. So there's a real conduit that
mm.
music fans can trace that run deeply back and forth up and down that Appalachia range.
Yeah, yeah, agree totally. Um, Now, I believe you've got about 11 album releases, and the latest album, San Pellegrino, am I saying that right?
Oh, that's very close. I'll give you points on that. That was San Palorino.
San Pellegrino.
Yeah,
Had so many accolades, and the lead single, 2 Days of Highway, was a semi-finalist in the international songwriting competition.
yeah,
Can you
yeah.
tell us a little? And I've watched the video. I'm going to talk about that in a sec. Can you tell us a little bit about that song because it's so great, 2 Days of Highway, and a little about your co-writer Dan Young.
Yeah. Well, it's the song itself, the sentiment of the song, I think for anyone who needs to travel for work and whether they fly or they have to drive, like growing up here in Atlantic Canada, a segment of the community that of trades workers that would fly out to Western Canada, and be out there on contract work, whether it was working in oil fields or building pipelines or working in um, sort of typical industrial settings. And then they'd go out and work for weeks on end, and then they'd come back home for a rotation, and so there's sentiments of that in this song that I think about when I travel across Canada. And I know, having driven a large part of Australia over the last almost 15 years, you need to be accustomed to driving long distances.
Mm,
And so for me, when I'm on tour, because I know playing music and being in a live setting, that's what I'm built. That's what I'm designed to do. That's my purpose here.
mm,
But I do have a wife and a son that I leave behind when I go out on the road, and I miss them dearly. And once I've given everything that I can to the road for the tour, I turn my sights back towards the porch light,
mm,
and look for those familiar signs that I'm heading back home. And for me, I tend to get really, in those last 48 hours,
mm.
I tend to get really obsessed
Yeah,
with wanting to be home and sleep in my own bed,
yeah,
and enjoy a hot shower in my own
yeah.
uh, under my own roof, and but then get out and do it all over again.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people who feel that way, that there's this dichotomy in a home work life balance of wanting, folks who travel for work, but then really want to be back home in their own fortress of solitude.
And how old's your son, Charlie?
He just turned 15.
Okay, and he's he
Yeah.
picked the guitar up yet?
Not guitar. Actually, it's funny you asked that, because I asked him that question just the other day. And, because we don't have any shortage of guitars kicking around the living room. And but he plays piano, and he's played piano for years now, and he's really good at it. He enjoys it. He loves it as something that really stimulates him. I don't know if it's necessarily anything that he would ever endeavor to want to do professionally, and not that I would ever uh, you know impress upon him that he needs to take up the family business, so to speak. I want him to chart his own course in that manner, but it's, he plays piano almost every day. I can hear him in the room, and hear him plugging away on the music that he learns. And so it's, to see that aspect of it, even just to have develop a relationship with music, to have music more as a comrade, or more as a confidant in your life. It doesn't have to translate into an occupation. And I think just to be able to see him invest his time and his acuity into creating that relationship with music, it's wonderful to see now as a parent.
Yeah.
I've been on both sides of that equation now, growing up with my folks encouraging me to be musical, and then now to see it as an adult, it feels quite satisfying, and sort of full circle now.
Just going back to the video of 2 Days of Highway, it's joyous. I can see it comes across okay. I can see what this song's all about by just watching the video. You're driving and you're banging the steering wheel, and it's also telling the things about what can go wrong. It's really great. Did you have a lot of input into the making of the video?
Well, that was, what, I got to be honest with you. I hadn't made a whole lot of music videos leading up to that one over the course of my career. I've had some live stuff done, and one or two things through the years where I was in a closed environment performing the song, but never choreographed.
Mm.
And I kind of use that term loosely as well. But
Mm.
I mean, you know what I mean when you look at that video. It's clearly a video that has it's a thought out,
Mm. Mm.
you know, storyboard.
Mm.
But I had never done one of those before, because I never felt comfortable seeing myself on camera.
Mm.
And so it was an effort to get out of my own comfort zone to do that in the first place. And so I did, in that sense, working with the director Matt Corkum, who had directed a lot of music videos for some friends of mine here called the Town Heroes,
Mm.
who have a great catalog of music. I felt instantly at ease with his approach to doing shooting a music video, and doing it in a way that I felt I didn't feel exposed or vulnerable, or that my own my own inhibitions were on display for 3.5 minutes. And so that was the one that really was a wonderful experience. And immediately after seeing the finished product of that, thinking to myself, well, why didn't I do that sooner, and enjoy that experience sooner in my life? But uh, uh, getting back to your question, you had asked about Dan Young,
Mm.
the co-writer of that song. And just quickly, I'll say Dan and I met a number of years ago when I had started streaming on the I guess it's a primarily a video game platform on the website Twitch.
Mm.
And but there's a great music community on this,
Mm.
and there's a lot of Aussies,
Yeah.
Aussie musicians who stream on Twitch. And so I met Dan through that platform when he was living in Ontario, and he and I connected, and he, for a small stint, came to Halifax to get connected with the local music scene here, and that's when we after having met him virtually and
mm,
been friends with him for a couple of years through the platform, that we actually got to meet face to face and sit down and do some songwriting.
mm,
And he's a fantastic country writer.
mhm,
And so he brought that element to it, because this album, San Pallarino in particular, I wanted it to take on a decidedly different tone stylistically, and have a more roots Americana vibe. And the way I sat down, the way the producer Chris Kirby and I sort of envisioned this is, if you if you could imagine Jason Isbell and Chris Stapleton
mm,
in a band together,
mm,
what would that sound like?
mm,
And that was our guiding light on what San Pallarino represents.
yeah. Fantastic. I mean, two of my favorite artists. Actually, that I was just going to say, because I read that you wanted the song to sound like Jason Isbell and Chris Stapleton. We just had do you know Kevin Walsh?
I sure do. Yeah.
Yeah, because he played at the club just recently with another Aussie guy, and he talked about Chris Stapleton recording one of his songs, which is a nice little money earner for him.
Oh, wow. I
So
didn't
yeah,
know that.
yeah,
Hey, that's top
yeah,
shelf.
that's right. So has working with other songwriters broadened your horizon or really pushed you into other areas?
It has, and in a way that, especially with this record, because this record felt particularly close to the bone emotionally for me, um, and I needed to get out of my own way as a writer, because I would have easily sort of, I don't want to say fallen into all the same trappings as the writer, the same habits that I would use on other or other tropes, but just to have another perspective on
Mm,
the topic,
mm,
and having and listening to ideas on that topic from the perspective of someone else's lived experience,
mm,
I think makes for a much stronger weave
mm,
in the tapestry.
mm,
And so I don't I think every song on the new record is a co-write.
mm,
I don't think there's a single song that, uh, a lot of the songs I would have started and brought to some of the other writers,
mm,
but I don't think there's a single song, thinking of it now, that
mm,
is wholly a Charlie Acorn song.
mm,
And 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 I love
mm,
that these other writers
mm,
could bring a piece of themselves into singing something that was so personal to me,
mm,
and yet they could invest and leave a part of themselves in the writing of each of these songs.
mm.
I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to have been able to write with some of these writers. We have this goes back to what I was saying before about here in Atlantic, Canada, is such a crucible
Mm,
for legacy music influences. And by legacy, I mean talking about music, Irish music, and talking about Scottish music, and British folk music, and then all the Appalachian music coming up the range, and blues and that sort of thing, that have all had these rich, on their own, these rich legacies. And then Atlantic Canada has become sort of this cauldron, this mixing pot for a lot of that, to really elevate storytelling, songwriting.
mm,
And so I feel very privileged that I get to call this community home,
mm,
and get to be able to share it with some very, very outstanding songwriters.
mm.
And it means a lot to me to be able to then send that music out into the universe and have people connect to it in their own ways.
Yeah. Uh, Now we talk about the Australian tours coming up with Lloyd Spiegel. It's just around the corner.
Yeah.
When did you meet Lloyd? And I know I can sense that you're not just touring buddies, but you're very close friends as well.
Yeah. 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 I met Lloyd. I mean, I'd been familiar with Lloyd. We met in 2016.
Hmm.
And like I said, I started touring Oz I want to say, like, my first trip to Australia was to play at Woodford.
Yeah.
And um and then ever since then, from 2011, those first few years, I was seeing Lloyd Spiegel posters
Mm.
everywhere. I was playing a lot of the same venues, and in some cases, we would be only a matter of a week or maybe 2 weeks apart from each other when I'd be there touring on my own. And so I got familiar to who Lloyd was, but we had never met. And then at the East Coast Music Awards, which is our regional music conference, which incidentally is taking place this week.
Mm.
Um, the organizers of the export development program of that conference, they had invited international artists to come showcase at the event, and in the process get them to do some writing together.
Mm.
Well, that like pair the internationals off with some of the
Mm.
regional acts and do some writing together and see what came of it. In our case, because Lloyd and I had never met face to face up to that point, we did a lot of it over Skype.
Mm.
And that first meeting, we were sort of batting things back and forth about what we wanted to talk about. But Lloyd was on tour at that time in Brussels, or in Belgium rather, and he was meant to play Brussels this particular evening, and that we were going to get together again on Skype the next day after his show. Well, as fate would have it, that very day was the day of the terrorist attacks in Brussels on the airport and on the subway lines.
Mm.
And after a few days after, when the country's communications kind of came back online and the dust began to settle, I was able to get a hold of Lloyd, and he talked me through the situation. And through his experience of going through that, we wrote this song called "Refuse to Fear,"
Mm.
and that subsequently came out later that year in 2016. And so we had written it, and he'd send me a couple lines, I'd send him a couple lines, and he had the couple of chords that he was playing around with, and like a rock in the tumbler, we kind of polished out the edges. But it wasn't until that the conference finally came around that we actually got to meet face to face
Mm.
for the first time, and actually sing the song
Mm.
in each other's presence for the first time. And it seemed like that for us, because we had walked very similar roads,
Mm.
even though we might be speaking a different dialect of the genre. Um, it forged a bond very quickly that has been a meaningful and um, uh, a very assuring relationship since. I consider Lloyd to be one of my closest friends on the planet,
Mm.
and I think the world of him.
Yeah, that's how what I sense. And you guys did release an album in 2021, I believe, with yourself, Lloyd, and Susie Vinnick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how did that album all come about? And tell us a little bit about Susie.
Well, Susie Vinnick is a cherished and beloved Canadian roots blues artist, vocalist, multi instrumentalist from Ontario and near Niagara Falls. And her and Lloyd had been sort of um, acquaintances over the last few years. And Susie and I have known each other for almost 20 years.
Mm.
And our at the time our mutual contact, Sarah Porter. Sarah manages Lloyd for a lot of his Canadian tours and things like that. Um, the three of us were looking at, well, how do we come out of the pandemic
Mhm.
and tour again in a national way? Um, to try to get the wheels turning again on that front. I mean, from Lloyd's perspective, it was him getting the wheels on the international bus turning again. Um, and Sarah had the thought of, well, what if the three of us got together to work on an acoustic album that was really representative of if the three of us were literally sitting around the kitchen table,
Mm.
you know, what sort of sounds could we make just the three of us in that space?
Mm.
And that became the center point of that acoustic record. And it's a lot of folks refer to it. We labeled it as Acorn, Spiegel, and Vinnick,
Mm.
and a lot of folks refer to it as the International Roots and Blues Kitchen Party, which
Mhm.
was the name of the tour. and the record, and it became this wonderful way of the three of us coming together and sharing the load
Mm.
of getting back out on the road. And we did 27 shows across Canada when that album came out,
Mm.
and at a time when a lot of venues just didn't know if they could open and how do they come back from the brink of COVID,
Mm.
and rebuild that trust with community, with audiences who want to come out and support,
Mm.
but had these uneasy feelings about being in public again.
Mm.
But we found a way of finding those many 2 dozen presenters or more that could all work across the country in the same block of time that enabled us to pull that record off.
Mm.
And I don't think I have to give the venues a lot of credit, because I think if they couldn't have come together, we would not have been able to put the record together in the way that we did,
Mm.
and have it come out sounding the way that it did.
Mm.
And I think it's very cool to say that Lloyd shares in having his first ECMA, East Coast Music Award
Mm.
for that record, because it ended up picking up the blues category that year. And it's a beautiful sounding album, and it brings together three very distinct perspectives, not just from life experience, but from the way we approach performing music and songwriting. And I think it's it's a wonderful sort of trifecta of sounds, and I'm that'll be a feather in the cap that I'm eternally grateful for.
Yeah, it's a ripper, all right. I was gonna ask you about, you've been to Australia several times. Do you see Australia and Canada being similar? And we have sort of spoke about that, which is good. But without getting too much into politics, I'd assume that Canadians aren't too happy with what's going on across the border.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's you only have to turn on any news channel that's outside of the U.S.
Mm.
to actually get an accurate view of what's happening inside the U.S.
Mm.
And I think, looking at what just happened in our Canadian federal election
Mm.
a week or so ago, and subsequently what happened in Australia with
Yes.
your election,
Mm.
there has been a decisive move, at least in Canada, moving more to a centralist perspective that invokes some stability,
Mm.
but still has empathy
Mm.
and the will to do good by the people
Mm.
at the forefront. There's a way to do that, and I think there's a way forward on
Mm.
that.
Mm.
Um, the divisive tones and the constant character assassinations
Mm.
completely suck the air out of the room
Mm.
on policy debate.
Mm.
And if we got down to the root of talking about policy debates, then maybe there would be more merit
Mm.
from some of the other parties that have struggled to get the kind of foothold that they thought that they were going to get.
Mm.
And
Mm.
you know, in terms of how that then parlays into dealing with the U.S.,
Mm.
it's it's extremely uneasy. The tariffs themselves are a whole kettle of fish right now. And as a matter of fact, just over the weekend, the U.S. president announced that he was prepared to introduce 100% tariffs on the on any movies that are produced outside of the
Mm.
states, and that has a major
Mm.
um, ripple effect
Mm.
on on the arts communities by and large. Nova Scotia has such a thriving film industry here.
Mm.
If because it's cities and coastlines and rural areas can be used as stand-ins for so many locations
Mm.
that the a lot of it is red tape, but a lot of it is, this is what the storyline calls for.
Mm.
And so, that's one example of where things are so uneasy right now. And as difficult as that is, that pales in comparison to the pure argument of self-existence.
Mm.
And I feel, as a straight white man, I I I feel I empathize for those who have been on significantly more challenging journeys in their life, whether they're part of the LGBTQ
Mm.
community, whether they're part of indigenous communities, whether they're in minorities, whether they are transgender,
Mm.
and working within the arts, for instance, and trying to make their way into the States to
Mm.
connect with audiences there that support the arts and want to be, the arts are meant to be a conversation. They're not meant wholly to be political statements,
Mm.
although it certainly inspires um, uh, a lot of, I don't want to say rhetoric, but a lot of you know uh, sociological expressions, because it's, people have so much to say. And the fact that the US government would actively seek out segments of the community to not only quell their voices but deny their right to exist
Mm.
is it's unconscionable.
Mm.
And it's such a hurtful this and keep in mind, these feelings and these sentiments are coming from someone who grew up as a Star Trek nerd, of looking at philosophizing life as a way of, there should be a unifying goal. It
Mm.
shouldn't be about how can we put segments of the population down and keep them down.
Mm.
Um, I think of the poem "If" from Rudyard Kipling, often in these situations.
Mm.
And there are so many great lines in the poem, but of course the poem opens up with the first two lines: "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you."
Mm. Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
uh, if you can bear to hear the words you've spoken,
Mm.
left broken essentially on the floor,
Mm.
and not be swayed by that. Like there's like I worry about where we are going in a society when we've been A, desensitized to the
Mm.
noise,
Mm.
and B, told that if we're not red in the face and shaking our fists at the other people
Mm.
for being other people,
Mm.
then we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't advance the species.
No, you're exactly right. Well
Yeah.
said. Well said, my friend. Now, I think we mentioned before another Nova Scotian, Harry Manx, who's a regular at Way Out West. Do you bump into him at all?
Oh, well, actually, Harry lives out on the West Coast,
Okay.
West Coast, off of Vancouver Island,
Oh, that's right.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, a little island called Salt Spring Island.
Yeah.
But Harry was just here a few months back, for a great tour on the East Coast, and so I do get to see him from
Yeah.
time to time through the year. Certainly not as often as I'd like, but yeah, Harry. I still think about that live album that Harry recorded in Australia years
Mm.
ago,
Yeah.
with that amazing backing choir, that three-piece choir that he had, the vocalists. I never did get their names, but it was an amazing live album.
Mm.
And yeah, Harry's he's one of the true legends here on the Canadian scene. That he's someone that has always managed to kind of forge his own path, and bring in different genres, different influences,
Mm.
and make them feel like it's a natural fit. And
Yeah.
yeah, Harry's a cut above, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
He makes the banjo cool again.
Doesn't he? Sorry, Pete Seeger, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll go jump back to the Australian tour, which I think includes some 13 dates around the country. What does a Charlie and Lloyd gig look like? I guess there'll be a lot of tall stories, and some of them may be true.
Some of them, yeah. Well, I mean, it's one thing that I think Lloyd and I both share in common is, well, why would we let the truth get in the way of a good story,
Yeah,
right?
exactly right.
Uh, yeah, but yeah, I think because we've had a lot of parallels in our lives, we can share some stories that one thing I know about Lloyd is that he is a student of human behavior,
Mm,
and I love how he watches people and
mm,
he looks to connect with folks in a very authentic way. None of us who do this for a living
mm,
want to go through this life
mm,
alone or lonely,
mm,
and that's one thing that I really respect about Lloyd is that the center of what he does is to connect with audiences,
mm,
and so getting a chance to share that with him on stage and off stage, to me, I think you're going to get a lot of stories that are have a lot of common threads,
mm,
but seen from different perspectives of living in two different parts of the world. I think you'll get some instances where we let the guitars speak for themselves,
mm,
and we get out of the way of the instrument,
mm,
and that's something that I'm really looking forward to. And a little, so always there's always a little friendly chirping on stage too, back and
mm.
forth.
It's like the old-fashioned cutting contest sometimes, is it?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's all I've got, mate. Thanks for taking the time. We're so looking forward to seeing you back at the club Sunday, the 8th of June. It's great that I've had this chat and we'll get it up, put it up on YouTube and safe travels, my friend. We're looking forward to
Yeah,
seeing
thanks a
you.
lot, Rob. I do appreciate it. And listen, you now that we've been in touch here, if you need anything leading up to the show, just give me a holler, and
Cool.
I'll do what I can to get it to you straight away.
Thanks, mate. All the best. All the best, my friend.
Cheers, pal. We'll see you soon.